So what police reform would you advocate to prevent more lives from being taken?
Obviously, whenever something like that happens, there must be swift justice. So if there is a situation where you have a rogue policeman who does something like that, that needs to be publicized and they need to be punished to the severest extent of the law.
Next question. There are no questions, we're gonna leave some.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Catherine has one.
Catherine? Okay, Catherine.
Yesterday, I was all talk about databases. Dr. Carson, at your press conference, you said you wanted to have a database on everyone who comes into the country and that we shouldn't treat anybody differently based on their race or religion. Later on in the press conference, you said, you would be in favor of monitoring mosques if there was any evidence of radicalization. So should we be treating?
Yeah, what I said is I would be in favor of monitoring a mosque or any church or any organization or any school or any press corps where there was a lot of radicalization and things that were anti-American.
So should we be, though, in favor of treating people differently based on religion, specifically?
Well, of course not.
In the back, ma'am?
Hi, Vanessa.
And who you with?
Vanessa.
Vanessa, go ahead.
From the Washington Post.
Okay, Vanessa.
How you
question
doing?
on-
One of the reasons we got here so quickly is that we were ushered out while you were answering a question about your own experiences. The question I want to know now is, do you think that institutional racism, which is also something that these young people have been talking about, particularly on college campuses, do you think that is still a problem? If so, how do we as a society attack institutional racism?
Well, if there's institutional racism, the wonderful thing is now we have lots of ways of exposing it, including social media. So I would suggest where it exists, bring it to light.
Do you think it exists?
It probably exists somewhere, but my point is, expose it.
Did you have a follow-up?
I
Vanessa?
do, because
Okay.
look at some of the things they're talking about on college campuses. Some of the acts of racial intolerance, racial slurs that don't get addressed by the administration. So, when you say it probably exists, it suggests that maybe you don't think it does.
No, my point being, if it exists, expose it. That's my point. That's your best defense, to expose these things, not just to let them exist in a vacuum.
I understand. Can you personally name an instance of it or something that you think needs to be addressed? Because I'm trying to find out if you actually believe it exists or if it's, people are just overreacting or whatever.
Wherever there are human beings, you are going to have injustice. Because people are imperfect. If there's a pattern of it, it needs to be exposed.
So his answer to your question is yes.
Thank you, Armstrong, so much.
Kevin Cerulli with Bloomberg News. At the end of this speech, you talked about the hurdle, just that people should just start jumping over it. But you did say that the hurdle was higher for African Americans. What would you do, Dr. Carson, as president, to make sure that the hurdle for everyone is equal?
Well, our Constitution was designed to treat everybody the same. And that's what I would do. I would treat everybody the same. I wouldn't treat anybody in an extra special way. So, for instance, when you talk about compassionate action, which is something that I have advocated for, there are some people who are born in our country or who live in very difficult circumstances. Through no fault of their own, they work very hard, they achieve, but they may not achieve at the same level as somebody who was born into great privilege. I believe that it's always reasonable to give an extra look at the underdog. But I do not believe underdog status is dictated by race. Underdog status is dictated by circumstances.
I just have one follow-up with regards to, you're the only Republican speaking here today. How important is it for the Republican Party to come to predominantly African American institutions to hopefully expand the party, and why is it important to you?
All people are important to me. You know, having grown up in the black community, obviously it's extremely important to me to see success, because I know that there are a lot of people in that community who are very smart, talented people. And you know, I want to establish a dialogue with them so we can talk about how do we actually create those ladders of opportunity that bring people out of a state of dependency. You know, you look at the economic condition in the black community, why is it moving in the wrong direction? We need to be talking about this, and we need to be coming up with real solutions and not just these Band-Aid things.
Dr. Carson,
No, wait,
Jamie.
they're coming to you, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Nadine Gilchrist with Rejoice 1090 radio station in Greenwood. Just shifting gears for a moment, but speaking of injustice, as a United States veteran and the state of the VA as it is right now, what is your plan to correct some of the injustices that's carried out on the veterans of today?
Well, first of all, thank you for your service.
You're certainly
Appreciate that
welcome.
very much. You know, I believe that when a person volunteers for the military, they should be established in a support group the very day that they join. That support group should be with them throughout their entire military service and should include individuals who work on integrating that person back into society a year before their term ends, so they have a seamless integration. They should have a health savings account that is subsidized by the government, which allows them to go to any healthcare facility in the United States, and we ought to be delighted to take care of them. If they want to go to the VA, they can go to the VA. But I think we can use the VA to much greater effect if we incorporate it as a research facility for traumatic brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, limb replacement, and a lot of things that are relatively unique to the veteran population. And if we start treating them right, I think we won't have this 14% decrease in the number of people who are applying to the military right now. We need to treat our military people correctly.
Sorry, ma'am.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Carson, Jamie Self with the state newspaper here in Columbia. You mentioned in response to, I think, probably 3 questions, your plan to encourage companies to repatriate profits and then invest 10% of it into low-income or high-poverty areas. If that doesn't work, you said it was going to be easy, but if it doesn't work,
It will work.
do you have one other policy proposal that you would put to Congress and push to help the African-American community and high-poverty communities?
Well, first of all, I reject the premise that it won't work, because it will work. There's absolutely no reason that that won't work. And it has worked in the past when companies were much more interested in creating their own workforce and how they would invest. And so if it doesn't work, we'll make it work. That's my answer.
One last
One
follow-up.
follow-up?
No, here, one last, well, no, I've got to go to you because you didn't ask your
Thank you.
question.
Dr. Carson, I just have one follow-up.
Did you ask a question already?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I think so.
Erica Brown, CBS. I always have one follow-up in regards to policing. Now, you just mentioned in instances where there have been murders of unarmed citizens at the hands of police, that they should be publicized and that there should be swift justice. Now, as of recently, we've seen this happen. We've seen it happen again, where it's been on the forefront of the media. It's been publicized. Some of them have been convicted. Some of them haven't. Policy-wise, just to expound on that, is there anything that you would do to help this recurrence? I know you've mentioned that introducing police officers to the youth early on under amicable circumstances can help in the long run, but now when we're faced with these issues, is there anything policy-wise, whether it's retraining or body cameras, that you would implement to kind of help prevent the recurrence that we've seen in the last decades?
Well, one policy that I would encourage is whenever an instance like this happens, the very fact that I've only heard of a couple of them, but they're indicating that there's a whole bunch of them, you're saying, you know, that's wrong. I mean, we should all know about this. I mean, it should be made into a big deal.
You had a question here.
I don't think
Was he done?
done.
I don't think.
Oh, you're not finished? I'm sorry.
No, I don't think Dr. Carson.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. It needs to
We
be
do it all
made-
the time.
It needs to be made into a big deal, not only for the community, but for the police departments. so that they understand that this is, when you are given the authority and you are given a gun, that carries a tremendous responsibility. And anybody who abuses that should be the dredge of the earth. You know, make sure that
We're gonna do you, because Dina tells me I gotta get out of here. She's giving me away.
I just
I'm-
have a follow-up.
And
on
that's
my other
quick.
question.
On a grander scale, the tax imperatives have obviously made national security a higher priority, especially in the minds of voters. That's something that, in your polling, has been a soft spot. What are you doing? Are you making any changes to kind of convince voters that you, despite the lack of foreign policy experience that you might have had as a neurosurgeon, that you are up to the task of being commander-in-chief?
Well, one of the things I'm doing is what I did today, is remind you guys that I was the first one to talk about these things. And if you go back, you can find where I've been talking about this for a long time and saying exactly the same things that the so-called experts are saying now.
Finally.
Just gonna follow up on my database thing really quick. Trump just clarified at a rally in Birmingham that he wasn't talking about a database for Muslims, but just specifically Syrian refugees. Yesterday you said you want everybody in a database. We're already doing that now, but the problem you mentioned was that we just aren't monitoring them once they're here well enough. How would you monitor these people differently than what we're doing now?
Well, we clearly need to increase funding for the FBI. You know, they only have the ability to monitor somewhere between 30 and 60 people. That's ridiculous. And we need to give them much greater monitoring capacity than that. It's as simple as that.
And monitoring
Thank
people
you.
that are already here?
Thank you. We are out of here. Thank you.